And this project started at the beginning of the school year with this notebook, a composition notebook. Every day at the beginning of the day, we have what we call warm-up activities. The warm-up activity that what I asked them to do was to fill out a starter stem. So the starter stem might be something like, for recess today, I would like to, and then they have to fill in the blank. Well, about a month into the school year, the responses I was getting from my students were mundane and they were boring. And on top of that, if you know anything about second graders, if they're bored, they also like to do other things that's not what you've asked them to do, like get in trouble. So I had to think of something to get them continuing to do their activities to start out our morning. We have a lot of our students that are low SES, low socioeconomic status, so that means they are students of poverty. And for the first 30 minutes of the day, they come in, and half of my students haven't eaten breakfast. Half of my students may not have their basic needs met at home, so we have to meet those at school. So it's really important that I have an activity that they can just dive right into and not worry about catching up, so to speak. So I do these journals with them, and typically in the past, when I've used Twitter, I've used it as a means of communication with my parents, my students' parents, that is, or communication with community members so they can see what my students are doing in the classroom. However, I felt like it wasn't successful when I used it in that aspect. So when I came up with this idea, I was on my way to school one morning, and I'm thinking, we're going to tweet Subway. That's what we're going to do. We're going to tweet Subway, and if they can create their own sandwich, what would it be and why? Now, I always give parameters to my students. So the parameters might be like, okay, you can't come up with a ham and cheese sandwich with mayonnaise, you know? And so it kind of gets them thinking outside of the box. What ingredients would you use that typically maybe would not be on a sandwich? And the response that I got from them wanting to do the journal entry was just incredible. Like, they were actually excited about writing. Now, I have a lot of students in my class that typically in second grade, they can read and they can write basic words. However, there are some students that writing is still a struggle. So I also give them the opportunity to draw out their picture. So we did this journal entry. I'm like, well, how am I going to put it on Twitter for Subway to see? And so I would get out my phone every day, and I would actually take a picture of all their journal responses, because not like every student can have a Twitter account at second grade, even though I know some of them do. I know they do. So we tweeted to Subway, and when I got a response back, it was like a favorite, like, you know, they can click on the little star or they can retweet, and they did that to my students' responses. And that was really powerful to them because they noticed that they were being acknowledged by another entity besides me or besides someone in the school district. This still had to be an activity that I did every single morning that they can get started on their own. And it still was, I was able to do that. So that's when Kohler came in. Now you're probably wondering, how in the world did I get an idea to tweet Kohler? Well, I was in the shower one morning, and I'm thinking, what am I going to do with my journal entry today? And I'm just thinking, I'm looking at the shower head, and I realize, wait a minute, a shower head. I'll have them design a shower head. And then I'm thinking, well, what company am I going to tweet out that might give us a response? Because not every company that we tweet, they don't give us a response, which is fine. I don't always expect that. But it is nice when the students do get that response because it's just that little feel-good moment. And so I'm getting ready for my morning. I just got out of the shower. I look down at my toilet. I'm like, Kohler, right there. Perfect. So I had who I was going to tweet and what we were going to tweet about. Now, what's important about these journal entries is that they're specific. I couldn't say design something in the bathroom that Kohler can make. They had to be specific, because the more specific of a starter stem I gave them, the more specific feedback they gave me on what their shower head would look like. So this is actually an example, or just a couple examples of the journal entries, and then Kohler did something really cool. They took their designers and they actually made illustrations for each of my students' designs. They did that for about 18 of my students in my classroom. And so I'm driving home from the gym one day, and my phone is just buzzing, just would not stop buzzing. So I get home, I check my phone, and lo and behold, Kohler had all their designs from my students, and they've actually made them into illustrations. I was ecstatic. No, not before had any other company had gone this far to reach out to my students in that way. One of the students, Tallulah, she wanted a banana shower design, so that way you could put soap on, and then the water would stream around you, so you don't want to get water on it at the same time that you're putting on soap. And then Angelo, the one on the left, he actually had a design for a fire-breathing dragon shower head, okay? Now, Angelo is a very creative kid, and he does not do illustrations at all. He does not like to do illustrations, so it's always a choice if they want to include that. Now, what's important to know about my students' designs is I would sometimes interpret them one way, and actually, they would have a whole different way of looking at it. Some designs I wouldn't understand. So I always had to get more feedback from my students, like, what did you mean when you said this in your design? And they could go on for minutes and minutes and minutes about, oh yeah, well it can do this, and then it would be able to do this, and they would just continue on. And I realized, well, sometimes they just don't always put them into words. So it was always nice to have that opportunity to do an illustration, and also to verbalize what they really wanted to say about their design. So some things I learned about this project. First thing I learned was acknowledgement is power. Even if we got a simple retweet or a favorite from a company, I would always pass that on to my students. Apple TV, by the way, is the greatest thing for a classroom because I can wirelessly hook up my phone to my projector screen, and then it would actually show up that they could actually see their tweet was favorited or if it was retweeted. And you wouldn't understand what that means to a second grade student who's in Lawrence, Kansas, and someone from somewhere else that is not in Lawrence is actually responding to them. Appreciate even the most far-fetched ideas. I looked at some of the ideas that my students came up with. I'm like, thinking to myself, you want me to tweet that? Okay, it's your call. And you'd be surprised when you ask them for more details and insight, it made sense all of a sudden. And sometimes what I would do before I would allow them to tweet it is all those ideas that they were telling me, they either had to include it in their design somewhere or they had to write about it before I would tweet it. And they were like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And for them to have that motivation right away is pretty powerful. Now this one was a big one for me. Even if you don't think you understand an idea, ask questions to validate or invalidate your understanding. So knowing that these ideas that they came up with, sometimes I had to go the extra mile and ask questions, and sometimes we did spend more time on this project than I probably should have, or told my principal I'd spent on it. But it was really exciting and entertaining for them because they were ready to learn every single day. This was a getting started activity, which turned into an activity that I could integrate into my math lessons, my reading lessons, social studies, and science, because all these companies encompass those subjects. And so this next school year, my plan is to integrate Twitter even more into our science and social studies, because those are the areas that in schools today, they're oppressed because we always have to focus on reading and math. So that's my project. Are there any questions I can answer about it or anything?
Hi. I'm
Yes.
curious with the Child Online Privacy Protection Act, if there's
Right.
anything that you have to address specifically for that in order to allow the relationship.
So, good question. He asked about the privacy of the kids. Typically, whenever they tweeted out their journal ideas, if anything, I just used their first name. I didn't use a picture of them. I didn't use their last name. And all our school districts have to have written consent to be used, to have their picture or to have their full name utilized on any kind of digital media. And I already had all of that. So any kid that did not have permission were included in photographs if I ever did a photograph. Good question. All right. Well, all I have to say is I'm amongst a crowd that I'm not typically comfortable in presenting in front of. And if you are a part of a company that would like to be involved in my idea for my class this next year, follow me, Shane Hyman, on Twitter, and please let me know if you have an idea for a journal entry that we could do. And I would love to work with any retailers that I can or anyone individually who wants to work with second grade students. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I have a question for you, actually.